pointing out that for our weekends program, everything that we don't do with any public funding or public support. It's all men who are either paying to attend a weekend themselves, or we solicit funds for a scholarship fund in order to be able to help offset the cost of attending the weekend.
I mean, to have sort of people paying paying themselves. I mean, before they get to that point, they disclose what's happened to them. The triggers for disclosure are manifold, and of course, once someone has disclosed it, and they disclosed it to an individual, it still doesn't necessarily mean that they want to tell others about it, and of course.
Correct.
A great many victims are very reluctant, for a variety of reasons, to talk about these issues. And I just wondered, from your experience, if male survivor is approached by a victim and they're looking for advice, what do you say to them in terms of the potential benefits, should they feel effectively brave enough to talk about this in a more public arena? Because one can understand why we'd like to keep it private.
Certainly. Well, one of the first things that we share with survivors is first just to acknowledge and honor them for being a survivor. There are a lot of people who sadly don't make it. The burden of carrying this experience and carrying the silence and the shame can be very, very hard for a lot of people. So I think first is just acknowledging where somebody is in that moment and honoring them for being a survivor. And it's really on everybody's, every person has the right to determine how they're going to share their story, if they're going to share their story, in what way they're going to share their story. I personally feel, and I think many of the people who are involved with our organization feel that, being able to share our story either in therapeutic settings or even sometimes all the way, to speaking about it in public, is a very empowering thing for victims to do, and can often be a very, very important part of the healing process. But it's important to understand that we need to find the right venue and the right people to share our story with. Oftentimes, you'll hear about male victims, especially, who, perhaps, they'll have been keeping the secret for a very long time, and I know a number of survivors who shared with me stories of things like, well, I told my wife, and we talked about it, and I said to her, I'm going to tell you this, or I'm going to tell you this thing that happened to me, but I'm only going to talk about it once, and then we're never going to talk about it again.
Yeah. That's it. So you would say it's incredibly therapeutic if men can be brave enough to come out and talk about it, because there's a sense of relief too of sharing that, and it wasn't just them. I mean, I often talk to victims, and they say, well, it was just me. I'm in a particular environment, and I'll say to them, well, I'm pretty confident that it wasn't just you, and you talk to them, and then they find there were others in a very similar position in the environment in which this happened, and that helps them too, and having that recognition that they are the victim, because of course they are made to feel guilty. It was their fault, but being able to be brave enough and to come forward and talk, and they begin to realize, hold on, no, I am the victim here, and others see them as the victim and give them the support. I mean, that's incredibly powerful, and I've seen, it does enable people to move on. I mean, it can never be forgotten about, but it enables people to move on with a much more positive outlook on their life.
There are three things that we say victims want above all. Victims want to be believed, we want to be heard, and we want to be safe. And anybody who can, whether it's a solicitor, whether it's law enforcement personnel, police, social workers, mental health professionals, it's really shocking to hear about the number of professionals who find it difficult to provide even that basic level of care to a survivor. If somebody comes forward and shares or discloses that this has been a part of their experience, it's one of the simplest things to do to just look at that person and say, I believe you. How can I help?
Yeah.
And yet it's something that is staggeringly rare oftentimes in the experiences of many of the survivors that we work with, and I would imagine many of the survivors that you've spoken to throughout the course of your practice.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you talk about sort of as law enforcement officers. I mean, you know, that it's good that we have specially trained officers, and when it comes to having those difficult interviews, that that they are conducted in an environment that we wouldn't have seen 30 years ago. And
right.
in a sense, they are there to do their professional job, to get the evidence upon which they can then perhaps carry out further inquiries. They're not there to be necessarily the counsel, they're certainly not there to be the counsel or providing therapy or support. But yeah, my experience is that, you know, that they are very understanding. And when I talk to victims and say, look, you should consider, you know, making a formal complaint to the police and doing that, you know, it's great that I'm able to sort of reassure them and say, look, forget what you may have seen on the television or films about the way in which interviews are conducted. The way you'll be treated will be very different, and it will be in a sympathetic environment. We don't conduct in a professional way because that's the way the officers have to do it, but it will be conducted in an environment that is sympathetic to what's happened to you, and will be in that place where you feel most comfortable about talking about these very difficult issues. And I suspected it's probably the same with you, even though some officers, you know, can't say that we believe you. We believe.
Well, I mean, we feel, I mean, in the U.S., and of course, you know, the legal systems are, you know, somewhat different, obviously, but I think this much is true. There's a profound difference between the pursuit of justice and the pursuit of healing. And from our perspective as a victims advocacy organization, the thing that we really try to stress over and over again is that while they are separate pursuits, they don't necessarily need to be at odds with one another all the time. And, you know, the needs of, you know, the victim aren't paramount within a justice system because, you know, certainly in the United States, and I think this is also true within the UK, you know, there is a, you know, the rights of the accused are given, you know, paramount importance, which I would argue is a good thing. But when it comes to the work of healing, which is what we focus on, and in your role as a solicitor on behalf of survivors is very much a part of your focus as well, you know, there's a distinction there. And oftentimes, especially for men who've been victimized, they'll say to themselves, well, I'm not allowed to do the healing. I can't do any of the healing until we've taken care of this justice piece. And what we try to share with people is, you know, they're separate pieces, but they don't have to happen one after the other. You can be doing the work of healing as you're doing, you know, as you're engaging in the justice process. You know, and that also brings up one other big issue that's a much bigger issue here in the U.S. than I think it is in the UK. We have very, very restrictive statutes of limitations in many of the states here in the U.S. that make it impossible. For instance, in my story, I was sexually victimized when I was about 8 years old. I currently live in New York State, and as it happens, the abuse that I experienced, I would not be able to prosecute, even if I had irrefutable proof of what was done to me when I was a child. I would not be able to bring criminal charges or go to the police and have criminal charges brought against the person because I'm too old now. And so there's a big challenge that a lot of survivors in the U.S. face regarding that issue.
Well, that's, I mean, it's certainly in the UK, we're in victims here in a more fortunate position. I mean, there's no, in terms of criminal matters, there's no limitation on those. I mean, there's been some debate recently as to whether that should be applied, and I think that will be strongly resisted. If you've committed a crime, you've committed a crime. It doesn't matter if it's 30 or 40 years ago. And we've seen other instances outside of abuse where that's worked effectively. So I would suspect that despite some calls that there should be some kind of statute of limitation for criminal matters, I don't think that we will see that, and that's good news. When it comes to civil cases, we do have statutes of limitation, and the good news is that in general terms, that you need to bring a civil case within 3 years of effectively the abuse. But of course, what we've discovered in the last 20 or 30 years is that people don't talk about abuses as it occurs, or when they reach the age of maturity, 18 or 21, whatever it is, it's going to be decades later. And the civil justice system here has had to wrestle with that, but they've wrestled with it pretty well, and the law, certainly the law here has been sufficiently flexible to enable those innocent victims to proceed with cases, even when the abuse will go back many decades, subject, of course, to the quality of the evidence put forward. And that is very good news. And so, despite sort of attempts to try and resist that, and it's still on a case-by-case basis when someone brings a case, but I think it's encouraging that individuals here are not automatically deprived of their remedies, of damages, of compensation, just simply because they've only been able to speak about it, many years after the event.
Well, and one of the things I was also going to mention real quickly, we've done research studies with members of our organization and also other survivors who are not members of our organization. The average length of time between the incidents of abuse and disclosure is 21 years.
Yeah, I think you probably find the same here. Yep. I've sort of touched upon this issue of civil remedies and compensation, because that's, if an individual goes down the civil route of justice, that's all that the court's award that the court can make is effectively a monetary award that the victim or the organisation would have to pay to the victim. And I've heard recently here in a number of cases where there have been criminal trials where the victim has been described as a gold digger, that they're only making these complaints resulting in criminal prosecution because they hope that in the event that the defendant is found guilty, that they will then receive compensation. And I find that unsatisfactory, abhorrent, because my experience is people do not come forward with any idea about compensation. My experience, like yours, is people want to be heard, they want it to be acknowledged, and they want it to be understood. And the idea that there may be some financial redress, which can never compensate an abuse victim, whatever the sum, and the sums in the UK are not large, is just entirely wrong. And certainly I feel in the UK, lawyers like me have got to try and educate the public here to actually, so individuals, potential jurors, understand that people don't make these complaints and go to the police for justice because they are looking for some financial remedy. That's nowhere near the forefront of their mind. And even if that is an issue that they become alive to later on and wish to pursue, the compensation in the UK is up for relatively insignificant sums. There's no question of these individuals ending up, with gold in a treasure chest. That just is so unreal, and it just makes me very angry when they are accused by defence counsel or defendants that they are simply making these allegations for financial motive.
It's an extraordinarily common defense. We hear it here in the U.S. all the time as well. A couple of points. First, it is, as you said, extraordinarily rare for a person to come forward and to make these claims and to make false allegations. The research that we have shows that the times where a false allegation occurs most often, which again is extremely rare, is when you have a custody battle between parents and you have a young child that's been coached by one of the parents. The overwhelming majority of times where somebody comes forward, especially as an adult, and discloses and chooses to try and file charges, they are exposing themselves to ridicule. They're exposing themselves to exactly these kinds of allegations, and oftentimes you're dealing with somebody who was known in the community, was liked in the community, because the majority of people who commit sexual victimization are not strangers. They're people who are well known. They're people who are well known to the victims. Oftentimes they're well known to the community. So somebody who's coming forward and bringing these charges is oftentimes, they know they're going to be fighting an uphill battle, and they know it's going to be very difficult for them to get the kind of support that oftentimes the famous person does. I'll tell you also, I'm not sure how familiar, I know in England you've had the Savile case, which has been obviously very much in the forefront of the headlines. And I'm sure you've heard some of the issues around the Jerry Sandusky case here in the United States. I attended much of the Sandusky trial, and I will tell you, the first line of defense that was brought up was to question the integrity of every single one of those young men who was named in the criminal complaint. And the point was made over and over again, they're just in this for the money. And one of the things that I had the opportunity to sort of say as we were talking about it with various folks here, no survivor goes into this battle just because they think they're going to get money out of it on the other side. Fact of the matter is, there is no amount of money that will ever compensate me for the things that were taken away from me. You can't pay me off and make the trauma that I lived through, the abuse that I experienced, and the childhood that was stolen from me. There's no way to put a price tag on that. No. And even if I were to get paid mountains of
victims, there's some compensation potentially, and if we can use that to give you that additional medical support and turn your life in a different way, then
exactly.
That's success. Because if I can get you on the right track so that you can have a quality of life, meaningful life, and enjoy what others enjoy in life, then that's success. I know I can't remove what happened to you. That will always be there. But if we can stop that being a focus for your life, to the extent that every morning when you wake up, that's a dominant picture in your head. If I can get you to a point where actually you can see, as Churchill would have said here, sunny uplands and some real quality of life ahead of you, then that's success, allowing you to move on. And that's. But it can only help to an extent. Money does not resolve anyone's problems, and that's
exactly what compensation can and should do is make the conditions, allow for the conditions to exist in which a survivor can continue to do the work of healing, to pay for therapy, to help cover some of their costs of living. That we know that survivors inevitably have much higher medical bills, much higher mental health costs. Oftentimes it can be very difficult for them to hold down a job. So to be able to give them at least some degree of compensation to help them with some of those challenges, those financial challenges, then it makes it more possible for them to do the work of healing. And that's ultimately what it's all about.
Yeah, that's right. It's only part of a process. It's only part of a process. Has Male Survivor got a conference, I think, coming up later on this year?
Yes. So Male Survivor truly is an international organization. Last year we had well over 500,000 visits to our website, malesurvivor.org, from every country in the world. Great Britain is generally the number 2 or number 3 country that sends traffic to our website, and we have information on resources for male survivors in the UK listed on our website. So we also, in our discussion forums, have really a community where people can come together and interact with one another from around the globe and share their stories, so that men can just see that they're not alone, and their loved ones can also see that they are not alone and get support. Yeah. Our conference, we do a conference every 2 years, and our next conference will be coming up this fall, October 31st, November 1st, November 2nd, at the Newark International Airport Marriott, right outside of New York City, at the Newark Airport. And one of the wonderful things about our conference is it's truly international in scope. We anticipate having representatives from over a dozen countries both professionals and survivors themselves, will be able to join us. Our conference is the only conference in the world that's a professional conference, but whose sole focus is male sexual victimization. So we're able to bring together some of the leading experts in working with male sexual abuse survivors, people who are leading the way in doing research into the sexual abuse of males and sexual abuse in general. And we're able to also bring survivors themselves in. So we get a real wonderful interaction between the survivor community and the professional community, where people are able to share their knowledge with one another in a way that very rarely happens.
I mean, you've obviously done this before, and it's been incredibly successful, and I'm sure this year will be successful too. Can I say thank you for your time, I think, this afternoon, this evening here. It's been a real joy and pleasure to speak with you, Chris, and hopefully we could do this again.
Absolutely. Anytime. It'd be my pleasure, Malcolm. Thank you so much for your time and for all the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you, Chris. Very welcome. Take care.
Take care.